Eggman's note says that some elements might prove to be more resilient to change than others, and require deep time penetration, such as Sonic and Tails. How? What a terrible Voodoo Shark excuse. It better be explained why Sonic and Tails, for that matter, would keep existing even if Eggman goes back in time to kill his parents, after using Sonic's leftover DNA in a DNA testing kit to find them. As if Sonic wouldn't leave any DNA lying around for robots to find, like at the picnic. It would make sense that Sonic's house is only known by his friends if it's in a vacant place like Green Hill Zone, because it hasn't been blown up, and so Eggman doesn't know where to find his DNA. Then Eggman would have to carry out a hedgehog and fox genocide in the past. And obviously it'd only have to be a generation behind in the past. Is the excuse that Eggman's not capable of getting rid of them all despite having flying robots and the best technology ever? They notice a camera in the room. Tails naturally expects that all Eggman's gonna do is go after him in an Eggmobile that's vulnerable to a spin jump. I think Sonic would say this confident rant. An earthquake happens. A high whining sound is faintly heard from the ceiling, and a trickle of white dust drifts down and through it somehow. He could see a small black semicircle once again carving a large circle across the white ceiling, which reminds me of the black circles from earlier. It isn't Tails who thinks to say under the tables and dive under them, and Tails isn't ridden to take cover under them. Down through the hole in the ceiling descends a large round shape that's 4 times bigger than the last Eggmobile, which implies that it's just an easier target to hit. And it doesn't have the stubby little wings with 2 eyes and little, and it doesn't have the single front headlight or small windshield. It's described as streamlined just because it's different from the old one, when it doesn't do anything to convince me that the things it got rid of were necessary to get rid of to improve it. And at least it's sort of justified by the context. That's a world that Eggman's ruling, and so it's new and improved. It also says that it could fly around the sun, and implies that the Eggmobile apparently couldn't have done that. Well, it definitely couldn't have survived flying into the sun. But it'd have to be pretty magical to survive that. He must have found magical gems to do that. At the bottom of a metal arm, there's a chainsaw blade that spins around. But for no reason, Eggman has it withdrawn to the aircraft. They also aren't able to hear Eggman as he's laughing at them, which adds some realism that actually makes Eggman more than a little intimidating. And it's all because this happened in a world ruled by him that he altered the history of. It feels personal and impactful to have him do that to Mobius instead of Little Planet, something that just showed up for the one other game he does this in. That just wasn't as gutsy. Who cares that he altered its future? We didn't even know if there were any people living there. Somehow, Sonic thinks that the only thing Tails got right about what Eggman would do is wiggle his mustache at them. Even though it's still similar to the games in function, and he hasn't even found out if the Eggmobile's immune to spin jump attacks yet. Somehow, Sonic isn't hopeful that he could beat this aircraft. When he jumps into it, he not only doesn't affect it, but he gets shocked. So Eggman really has improved, but it's saying it was a shock of several thousand volts when he survives. This is pretty dishonest. I just have to assume that Sonic gets rings that heal him after this. There's no reason Eggman couldn't have made his Eggmobile like this in the first place, by the way. Eggman taunts them with an amplified voice, so why didn't he have them able to hear his laughter earlier? He calls the new Eggmobile the Eggmeister, when it was supposed to be intimidating. So he's still in character by making lame names sometimes. I was worried it would make him like Sadie M. Robotnik from a misunderstanding of Eggman's character, that he's fundamentally not a scary person because he's not serious all the time. Forgetting that it's what he does that's scary. And he's supposed to look lame so it can be all the more impactful from the surprise when he's dangerous. He's like the Joker. It's about being clever because it's subtle. That being said, his modern design is a million times better. Sonic tells Tails no, and the narration expects me to believe he was too late, even though he would have heard him and been able to follow his order in a second. Tails had put down the warper, which must have been to keep it from getting shocked with him, so it's annoying that the narration doesn't explain this. And despite knowing that's a possibility, he still jumped at it just as Sonic had shouted, when he should have seen that it wasn't damaged when Sonic hit it. He grabs the nose cone of the new Eggmobile. And for no reason, Eggman doesn't have him shocked this time, but instead gets a metal arm to pull a tail and dangle him by it. It at least lampshades that he's looking undignified. Why did Tails even try to attack it when he just saw the result? Eggman blasts the warper, destroying it, all because the writer forced Tails to put it down in plain sight because he thought he might get shocked and plan on attacking something he should think is invincible. I knew it'd be destroyed because of an idiot ball as soon as he didn't warp back when he got the evidence. The writer didn't need to add another idiot ball to why the warper was taken out of the picture to force the book to last longer, when it doesn't actually need to. The narration treats us like goldfish by reminding us what the warper was needed for, which only makes us feel like a little kid's story for a second. Then why did he write a story as dark as this? Eggman says he couldn't get Sonic and Tails on his first sweep through time because nobody knows who their parents are. Then why did the book never show the parents of Sonic's other friends, and only imply that they're orphans too? He doesn't explain why he didn't just do what I thought he would. He claims that in 14 minutes and 30 seconds, his robots will have located the first hedgehog and fox that evolved on Mobius to destroy them. They would have already been destroyed then. This writer's a moron. There's no reason for him to go back this far. He shouldn't have tried to use time travel as an element if he was too incompetent to avoid paradoxes. To avoid acting like the past is a separate universe that's operating at the same time as the present. The fact that this is done all the time makes it all the more inexcusable because the writer should have seen plenty of examples of this mistake to the point where he'd either learn it's bad or at least realize it's a cliche. And Eggman's supposed to be a genius, so he'd know better. He could explain that it'd be a lot easier to get rid of the first hedgehog and fox because historians know where they are. Tails says over by the table. The narration says Sonic was fed up with Tails' rashness and stupidity. I hate lines like this. Why is the narration insulting Tails for rashness as if Sonic doesn't qualify more than anything? He's the one who's been the careful one the whole time because that's what the writer sees as cool. Because it really is. Since Tails following Sonic into adventures is dangerous, it is rash, so it does make sense to assume he's rash based on just the classic games. Why does the narrator feel the need to reiterate every other time Tails was stupid, to the point where I had to assume it was just because he's a kid? Why does Sonic even consider trying to attack the Eggmobile again? I'm not calling it by its real name because that would distract from how awesome Eggman's usually being here. Sometimes he's stale, but not when he does something he's never done before, like in this book. Tails says there's a time machine at that table. Tails could have told Sonic that before Eggman showed up. I like the idea that Eggman's turning purple with rage, not because he told him about the surprising advice, but because he called him Laughing Boy. Eventually, Sonic grabs the device and jumps as Eggman shoots a laser at his own equipment by accident. Sonic grabs the top of the cabinet and swings himself on top and jumps to grab the metal arm. He expects Tails to catch it. Why didn't he use it instead of trusting him again? Tails misses the machine and knocks it into the air, and trying to grab it with his right hand knocks it away. But Tails snags the machine out of the air with his second tail, which is cool. Sonic yells awesome, and Tails wastes time talking before hitting a button in the middle of the dial on his side. I have to assume that by the sentence, "the world exploded," it means that it only looked to them like the world exploded because they went back in time. That's a weird way of saying it. So the last scene was really interesting, and so is this one. The narration says everything was dark and quiet. It then says Tails uncurled a little from the ball he'd wrapped himself in. That's more cowardly than him ducking and cowering. Either way, it's unacceptable. The air around him stinks of eggs, and his voice is muffled as he fails to get a reply from Sonic for some reason. He tries to uncurl fully, but the thing that stops him is a curved wall around him, holding him in place. He blindly feels the wall next to him that's warm for no reason, and realizes he's trapped in an oval area twice as big as him. He tries shifting his position slightly, and is poked in the stomach by the time machine. The place is described as airtight with not much air in it. Something clinks against the outside of his stone prison, and he hits the pointed end of the time machine against the wall, even though he should know he could use it to get to a safe place, escaping it entirely. The whole prison egg shakes and starts rocking. He strikes again, and this time the tip of the device breaks through the stone wall. He uses the blunter end of the time machine to chip away at the edges of the hole he had made in the surprisingly pathetically made prison until he's able to escape it. This whole scene so far does not have me bored out of my mind by unnecessary narration. For the most part, all of it matters. I wish they could have had a mandate to make that always the case. He's standing in a large muddy patch next to a lake, and around him are several large oval objects. The narration claims that Tails was an egg, but if that was true, then he would have drowned in yolk. The layout of the place he's in is similar to Green Hill, but the hills look like mountains. So it's in the past, and the reason the mountains became hills was erosion. And there's thick grass, and the trees cover the hills. One of the so-called eggs acts like it's hatching, so Tails worries. Now there's a wasted paragraph. Finally, he figures out that's Sonic and breaks it open. Sonic's spikes are still stuck on end from the electrocution, so that's a nice touch. And they're smeared with yolk. But why would that only be the case for Sonic? Sonic not only called him little, but also says that he's only getting there as a hero. But since he was slow and panicked, he is right. Tails sees the words copyright Robotnik on the time machine. And Sonic says that's all the proof he needs that he's been time traveling. And then he wonders if Eggman actually did invent the time machine. But he just said he did. And why did he say reckon in a UK book anyways? I thought it was just an American thing, but I guess not. Tails says he doesn't think so, but then he says Eggman must have built this based on the one he stole. Then why did he talk like he disagreed with him? Why doesn't Sonic point that out? Somehow, Sonic thinks that preventing the destruction of the ancestors of the hedgehogs and foxes is priority 3. And relatably, Tails sighs and gets told that he's more interested in finding out where in time they are. And his number 1 priority is to get the yolks out of his spikes and smarten up. Because he is selfish. Even though he's not supposed to be outright that selfish that he won't save people he knows are in danger. And he knows that in less than 15 minutes he'll be erased from existence. Well, he does need to smarten up, as he said. But I don't think he meant that literally with his arrogance. To be fair, he might be too distracted from being a mess to do well in battle. So he should say that. But somehow I doubt that fighting Badix is so brain-taxing that he'd need his full concentration. A big dark shadow looms over the lake. And Sonic says not now, just because all Tails could squeak out was the name Sonic. Why does a paragraph take so many words just to say that a gray dinosaur is looking over at them? And again, this is the first time dinosaurs were in Sonic. As soon as the story gets uneventful, the narration quality goes to shit again. It must be quite a magical dinosaur to still be alive in a world that doesn't have enough oxygen for it, considering that Sonic and Tails haven't died from oxygen overdose. The dinosaur licks Tails and Sonic. I don't think that's ever happened since, because they're usually vicious. Sonic wonders why Tails didn't chase it away, and Tails doubts he could have done that on his own, even though he's super fast. Tails says it thinks there are babies. And I wish it was explained that's because they smell like there are babies, because they were sent into eggs by an unlikely coincidence. Out of nowhere, Sonic hopes there's no family resemblance, which is unusually judgmental of him. But the fact that he's in a bad mood could justify it as being in character anyways. Tails says this tells them where they are in time, missing the point. It doesn't tell them exactly where they are in time by the year. Not that it matters. Since Tails couldn't have intentionally set the year, because he didn't know the year, because he didn't know what it was, the only reason they could have been sent to this point would be that it was the last point Eggman set it to, specifically to send robots there. Which makes sense because Eggman made this time machine. And they know that, so they shouldn't have been wondering when they were. I always felt weird calling it a time machine since it's small enough to be portable. It's too bad it doesn't call it a time device for a change. Sonic washes his spikes, and Tails feeds the dinosaur grass. And there's a surprising sweet moment, because Tails says to the dinosaur that seeing as it was her egg he just hatched from, this is the first time he's had a mother. So he offers to call her Mom. This is both sweet and makes me feel sorry for Tails, since he only says this because he's an orphan, and the dinosaur can't talk back, and he might never see her again. So when Sonic harshly tells him to not be so soft, I get it because he's lashing out from feeling sorry for him and wants him to stop. The dinosaur runs away, and Tails surprisingly recognizes the exact species of dinosaur that scared her away, which is great to read because the writer accidentally got Tails right. So knowing that he's a genius now makes it satisfying that Tails reads about intellectual subjects off screen, but it wasn't really faithful to the games at the time. It also makes sense here because it's easy to figure out that the reason he read about dinosaurs was that people think they're cool from a young age. So even though it comes out of nowhere and doesn't seem like it benefited him to learn about and is just there for a joke, it still makes sense if he isn't a genius. It's too bad Sonic's stressed enough to call him Encyclopedia Brain like it's a bad thing before telling him to run away from it, which Tails should have already known, and both should have already been doing obviously. Somehow, Sonic thinks it's a good idea to decide to hide in the trees because he can't be followed there, when their entire mission under a time limit is to run around until they find badniks to smash. So why can't they keep doing that? The dinosaur keeps getting closer to Tails with every step because his legs are so tall that its steps are massive. So that's supposed to make it make sense that it can outrun people who can move at the speed of sound? Their legs are only 10 times taller than Tails, so by that logic, it'd be 10 times faster than a human, which is still not going to amount to running at the speed of sound. Dinosaurs on Mobius are just magically super fast. If that was the case, that'd mean the species they preyed on would have ended up having smaller populations, and a few would have gone extinct. Not all though, because dinosaurs still got full. Anyways, the story's gone back to wasting our time, and won't stop until they start fighting those robots. They get spotted in their hiding place, and Sonic grabs Tails and runs into the woods, and I have to guess that's why the dinosaur doesn't catch up with them. That he's faster than Tails. The narration wastes time describing that go figure there's prehistoric life here when it doesn't factor into the plot. They know they're on a time limit, so what would actually happen would be that they'd never stop running until they found the robots. Sonic tenses when he sees a big dragonfly because it looks like a badnik, but doesn't attack it. He doesn't just tense up and stop to consider whether he should smash a badnik. Sonic's the type to follow his instincts, so he would have attacked it, instantly. Even Sandy M looked like it understood him better, because it kept saying that he's always rushing into action without thinking, which is just a cynical way of saying that he's just living by his own feelings. Since both things knew this, they must have learned it from Sega of Japan. Because it doesn't entirely make it clear in the games that he's always rushing into action without thinking. Because for all we knew, he really did stop to consider it before chasing after Eggman. Nothing happened to Sonic that would change him, so this is bad because the book said Sonic 1 and 2 happened in its past. And I can't think of anything good about this. Sonic explains that they must be in the right time zone because Tails hadn't changed the settings on the time machine. What took him so long to figure this out? The story takes too many words to describe that they're in a forest with a river, and they say robots with guns that aren't being described. Why do the writers of these books keep being too lazy to describe the robots? Or characters in general? I'm just forced to come to my own conclusion about what the robots look like, so I'm just picturing Silver Sonics, which would have been cooler. Sonic and Tails see a brown hedgehog and a fox, and I hate that the narration says they have white paws, as if the writer's dumb enough to think the gloves are actual hands of Sonic. You'd think he'd know through pop culture osmosis that they're gloves as a reference to Felix the cat, or they'd remind him of Mickey Mouse at least.